Hey, everybody, welcome inside the sit down. Ryan Mayer now joined by the author of Comeback Season, My Unlikely Story of Friendship with the Greatest Living Negro League Baseball Players, Cam Perron. Cam, thanks so much for taking some time today. How are you?
Doing well. Excited for the release of this book.
Yeah, I can imagine it's been a labor of love for you because as I was taking the opportunity to read through it, one of the players, Irvin Castile, had been telling you, you said in the acknowledgments, since the age of 13, that you should write a book about your experiences. So, what made now the right time to get this all together and put it out?
I think a lot of the former baseball players that I've been friends with and interviewed over the years are starting to pass away. We've opened a museum in Birmingham, Alabama, dedicated to the preservation of the Negro League. We've now had annual reunions for almost 10 years now, where we've had hundreds of players congregate at each of these reunions over the years. So I think all of that, all those stories kind of put together, has now just left me with the time and place and to put it all together.
Yeah, and you spoke about a lot of the memories that you have first contacting all of these players and then some of the stories and going through setting up the reunions and the opening of the museum. I do wonder, because not everything makes the book, right? Are there any memories that really stand out to you outside of what folks can read here in the book that's now coming out?
There's so many. Over the years, we would every time I'm in a city, I would often just call up a player and see if I could come by their house. So there's like definitely some memories like that. I remember one time, I think I touched on this in the book, but when I first went down to New Orleans, I went to a couple different players' houses, one being Gerald Saison, who I talk about in the book, another being Bill Stewart, who was a baseball player that I became friends with. He was one of the oldest living baseball players. Before his passing, he lived at the age of 104. And I remember kind of just going over to his house and knocking on the door. And when I walked in, the entire family and immediate family was there just waiting to kind of hear what Bill had to say. And so there was about 5 or 6 family members, and Bill was there. He was about 99 or 100 at the time. And for the first 10 to 15 minutes, he didn't really say anything. And he was kind of just warming up to talking. And then all of a sudden, everyone was like, shh, shh, shh. Bill's finally got the words ready. And for the next hour or two, he just started bringing back those memories and just telling people about his days playing in the Negro League back in the 30s and early 40s. And it was just a cool experience. And afterwards, I became close with Bill. He ended up coming up to the opening or one of the events that we had in Birmingham back in about 2015. And one of my biggest regrets is being invited to, I believe, Thanksgiving with his family, New Orleans style Thanksgiving. And I didn't go. So
And you speak about some of those memories and these conversations that you would have with players. And I think one of the themes for me in reading through the book from the players' side of things is that they were searching for really that evidence like, hey, look, I played. And because there wasn't as much widespread coverage in those days of the Negro League versus the regular traditional baseball that we know so much history about, it was tough for them to find. But then you come in with some of the research skills that you possessed from looking up newspaper articles through the internet and really provided that opportunity for them. So just what was it like for you in seeing the joy that really came across them as you showed them this evidence like, hey, look, here's the box score from this game that you played back in 1950, or this is the write-up of that game. Just what was that like for you?
it was cool, and you could hear the excitement in their voices as they kind of filled me in phone calls when we would touch base. One player, for example, Russell Patterson, who has we became very good friends. We roomed together at the reunion, and he has quite a few interviews and anecdotes in the book. But he was just a local here. He still is a local coach at some of the high schools, umpires, just really involved in his local sports community. And having played a couple years with the Indianapolis Clowns, he would tell people, I played baseball with the Clowns in the Negro League. And like most people do in this day and age, if somebody tells you that, you just, pull out your phone and Google it or something. And if you had played one game in the major leagues, you'd have an entire Wikipedia page, and you would say, oh, look, like I met this guy. Whereas with somebody like Russell and many former players of the Negro League, you could have played 2, 3, 4, you could have played 7 seasons in the Negro League and nothing comes up. So being able to show somebody, look, like this is actually like a newspaper article that features me. It's a 3-paragraph write-up about a couple games I had played or a home run I had hit or whatnot. That really kind of solidifies a lot of that, backs up what they had been saying. And I think that's, people really need to see that stuff, and it kind of gives them that verification, I guess. That
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And you speak about Russell. He's one of the players that that has excerpts within the book and explaining his relationship with you and how that whole process and the journey that you guys went on together in proving and showing that evidence of him having played in the Negro League. I wonder, obviously you knew what you were going to write, going through the edit process and writing the book. What was it like for you the first time, though, that you saw some of what these players were saying about your relationship? Because obviously I'm sure they shared some of these feelings with you in person, but it's a little bit different when you're seeing it in written form like that.
Yeah, it's definitely different. I think when they tell their story without, because I had my co-writer Nick, he helped put together some of those interviews, because I think it would be a little bit biased if I was kind of interviewing them on their interactions with me. It just takes a little bit of a different turn. So to see essentially an unbiased kind of interview, just giving the full details of their experiences or their relationship with me, it was, they said some things maybe they wouldn't have said to my face, but it was in a good way. It really just kind of brings, how they feel about me and what we've done over the years full circle. So really, really meaningful to see that, and exciting, and sad too, because a lot of
Yeah.
these guys are passing away.
And this book obviously is about your relationship with these players and how that developed over the course of time to where it is today. But I do wonder, because you've become one of our historians on Negro League baseball in this country, and with the help of Dr. Revel, it really did put together this museum, these reunions, to continue to keep the stories of these guys alive. So from your perspective, what do you think is maybe the thing we misunderstand the most, just from the outside, maybe about the Negro League and just the all-encompassing aspect of it? Because we're taught some of it growing up, but it's not a inclusive necessarily part of what we learn about sports just without going to look for it.
I think one thing in that regard, and it's being brought to light a lot more recently with Major League Baseball's kind of acceptance of the Negro League and their statistics, is the Negro League was its own independent league that for quite some time was thriving. They had a huge fan base of their own fans that didn't necessarily cross over to the major leagues. And it doesn't necessarily need to be, put into the category of or under the wing of Major League Baseball. It was its own great league, and it had its differences. And it was one of the largest Black businesses in America. I believe it was the 3rd largest Black business in America. And I think it needs to be accepted for its uniqueness. And, the Negro League, you would have teams, they would play exhibition games, they would play barnstorming games. Players would go over to Cuba or Mexico or Puerto Rico in the winter leagues. And it didn't really have that, concrete 160 something games this season
Yep.
type league that the major league has. But the way it operated, which was different, was very kind of unique in itself.
And that history and the preserving of it is so important, because as you mentioned, sadly some of these guys are beginning to pass on there, and in 15-20 years, as you mentioned in the book, we may not have any of these living legends left. So how much of that was also part of going into and making sure that this book was out there, in addition to obviously the museum that we have now, and some of these other avenues in which you've gotten Negro League history across, even creating baseball cards for some of these guys, because we didn't necessarily even have that from the preeminent baseball card companies that we think about.
Yeah, that was definitely a big part in it. You know, a lot of the guys that I've talked about in the story that I've developed friendships over the years have passed away. And, you know, regretfully, I didn't get the chance to document their stories to the point of which I would have liked to. Some of the interviews with players like Russell or Eugene Scruggs um, in the book, there are, for every guy like that, there's dozens who I had long lasting relationships with that I really just took for, you know, I enjoyed their phone calls and getting to know them, but I just never really thought at the time as a young teenager to write out interviews with them. I just kind of scribbled down some notes, and unfortunately I don't have any video interviews with them or any phone interviews or anything where they really like lay down their history. So I think that definitely pushed me to try to get some of these while I still could.
And for people that are coming in and reading this book, and maybe they have some background in the history of this league, maybe they don't, what do you want them to take away from reading this book and getting the opportunity to see these guys' stories in addition to your own and the relationship they're in?
I think one of the big things is that while the topic of the book is about Negro League baseball, it's not a baseball book. It's more of a history book, a book about memories and history, relationships, friendships, loss, discovery, all of those kind of elements. And you know, as a young kid, I was a big baseball fan. And over the years, I've personally just have not watched baseball as much or kept up with the modern games and athletes, but the history and the memories and the relationships of that has all kind of, you know, stuck with me. So I think, you know, I think this book could appeal to people that are not sports fans at all.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with you on that, because just from this interview, we've been talking now 10 minutes and haven't gotten once into the statistics of whether it's James Cool Papa Bell or Josh Gibson or Russell Patterson, what he did in the Negro Leagues. We're instead talking about just the general feelings and relationships that you developed with these guys, and preserving their history. And I think that's proof positive of accomplishing that mission. So just as you continue to look forward, you mentioned there that you didn't have the opportunity to have video interviews with a lot of these guys, and it's not something you would have thought about at the time. But I wonder, going forward for you, is there thoughts of a project like that to continue that documenting of this time period and of these legends?
I would say so, yeah. You know, I think as just everything gets more exposure, Major League Baseball's recent announcement has definitely brought more exposure to the Negro League. And I think many of the living players are going to get the chance to do interviews and a lot more of those things than in the past. I think my resources have also increased as I've become older and, you know, have the ability to do some of that stuff a little bit more on my own. So I do think that in the future, we will be, you know, seeing a lot more documentation in terms of interviews, videos, just kind of chronicling each of these players' stories in a much more, you know, well put together way.
And finally, just before I let you go, what's next for you? Because this is a big part of your life, obviously, and you've now put it down on 2 pages for people to read, but it's not all of what you do as well. So just what's next for you here as you go into the future and look forward on your next projects, and what you're looking to do next?
You know, I don't necessarily have a solid plan, but we do have a museum in Birmingham. Dr. Ravel, a research colleague of mine, whose or a large percentage of his collection is on permanent loan to the museum in Birmingham. You know, he's getting a little bit older, so I definitely see my involvement with the museum increasing in the coming years. Um, with players passing away, I'm not tracking down as many ball players as I used to, or speaking to players on the phone as much because there's fewer of them left. But I think with that, we're going to have a little bit of a change in gear towards the research that we do, with maybe, looking back on players that have passed away and maybe chronicling their careers a little bit more. Maybe doing some bigger events. I know before COVID hit, we were trying to do a large 100th anniversary event. We still haven't got the chance to do a big 100th anniversary of the Negro League event. I think when all this is said and done, COVID, all the players that are still left are going to be even more willing to get together than before. So we may be able to do, one of the largest events we've ever had. So I'd love to see that happen.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I think we all would love to see that happen too, because as you mentioned, this is a big part of history, and these guys continue to have amazing stories, that some of which are detailed in the book. So Cam, again, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it, man, and great work on the book.
Thank you, Ryan.